Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee on Tuesday, the 23rd of July at 6:30. I'd like to welcome the officers, Dawn Garton, also our internal auditor, Rachel Ashley-Corn, and Clive Tobin, sorry. I've got Tim Cousins on my mind there. And also I'd like to welcome members. We've got members including Alan Thwaite, who is subbing for Richard Sharp. We've got Mike Brown, Councillor Ian Atherton, and Councillor Jim Adcock. And we've also got our external auditor as well, which is Helen Lillington. Pronounce that correctly. Okay, so apologies for absence. I personally have not had any apologies for absence, but I know Catherine is going to mention some apologies. Over to you, Catherine. Would you just want to put your microphone on? Sorry, just in case.
Councillors Clay, Freer, Mason and Sharp.
Okay, thank you. Were there any substitutes other than Councillor Alan Thwaites? No. Okay, thank you. So minutes, to confirm the minutes held on the 26th of March 2024. I'll just go through the pages. If anybody has any comments at all, otherwise page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. Okay, I will take that as no amendments. All those in favour? Or do we need to propose and second it? Yeah, I'll propose that, and Ian Atherton will second that. Thank you, Clive. So I understand that's also okay. Declarations of interest. Members to declare any interest appropriate in respect of the items to be considered at the meeting. Also, if an interest comes up as we're debating it and you weren't aware of it, please do so on the paper. Councillor Atherton.
So I'd like to declare a professional interest in agenda item 10, specifically the Annex B work. The company I work for is one of the leading providers of MFA solutions, so I have a very deep professional interest in that. Whether it impacts my ability to vote or take part in any debate, I'd like some advice on, but I declare a professional interest in it.
Okay, well, you've declared it early enough, so I'll hand over to Clive, who is also our monitoring officer, to provide advice. And over to you, Clive. Would you? Yeah.
There's some difficulty in relation to that in terms of the substance of the appendix, because that's an exempt document. So obviously, I'm not proposing that we speak in any detail about the specific content of that, but from your perspective, does your company have a direct connection to the matters covered in that?
So to the matters covered, yes, absolutely. I'd say we're one of the market leaders in provision of multi-factor and other authentication mechanisms for IT systems. So I very definitely have an interest, but we have no direct connection to either the company running our IT or to Melton Borough Council, other than the fact that I'm an elected member of the council.
Sorry, it is working now. It won't be a pecuniary interest, but obviously, if you believe you're in any way conflicted because of the subject matter, and that you may have a particular view, you need to consider whether you may be biased in some respect in relation to that item. However, from as again, without going to the substance of the document itself, this is not considering any step which would be procuring, for example, those sorts of services. So there's no decision to be made there, which may involve competitors, etc. So I can't see how that would impact upon you or your ability to participate.
I've discussed this before, but in fact I do some work with Grant Thornton, but it doesn't in any way impact on this at all. So it's I just mention it in passing, but I don't have anything to do with Grant Thornton in relation to these matters. It's simply that I have a separate contract with them to do other work.
Again, there's no pecuniary interest there, and similarly, effectively, they're providing a service to the council. They provide different services to yourself through different offices, so there's no conflict there.
Thank you, Clive. And as always, to members, it's your at your discretion and your responsibility to decide whether you have an interest, and if you feel you do, you're more than welcome to leave. And I think Clive has given the reasons why you may find that there may be an interest or not may have an interest. If at any time that we're discussing the paper, and as Clive has pointed out, that you feel that you're conflicted, please raise your hand. I will go to you straight away, and I'm more than happy to excuse you. But if you feel that with all the facts on the table that you're not conflicted or the other stuff, we will proceed on that paper, and I will propose that we move on that one. But I'm comfortable with the questions asked and the advice given. And if you both gentlemen are, that's great. Okay. So item 4, external audit progress report and sector updates. To receive the external audit progress report, which is pages 9 to 24. And this is from Grant Thornton and from the dated the 11th of July for audit progress and the sector audit report. I think, Helen, and welcome to our second meeting. It's great to see you again at our meeting after meeting you in person at the first meeting. But without further ado, if you don't mind, I will hand over to yourself, and I will ask members to ask any particular questions that they have. If there is anything that you feel the audit committee need to be aware of, please raise that, and also challenge members and officers as well. Over to yourself.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hopefully I'm coming through loud and clear. I apologies for doing this virtually, but hopefully as it's just a progress report, members are comfortable with that. So as you said, Chair, I was there in person in March to present the audit plan and the informing the audit risk assessment document. What we tend to do in between those meetings is provide a bit of a progress report, and as part of that progress report you'll also see a range of sector updates. They're things that we think members of the committee might find particularly helpful. Some committees like to see them in full, like to see them in detail and present them as part of this report. Other committees are happy to take them and table them and consider them without necessarily me presenting them. So it's something very much for you to think about, and I'm conscious that it's not something that we've done with you before, so I've very much presented it as a full report for this time round. I suppose the thing really just to mention to you, and I'd want to highlight as part of the report, is we mentioned progress in terms of the financial statements audit. Obviously that's in relation to 23-24. I know that officers have published the 23-24 accounts, and we have sight of those. Our fieldwork is still due to start at the beginning of October, which is unchanged. But I do highlight in the report that there's still the preceding year's audits that need to be closed, and they remain the responsibility of the predecessor audit. I think probably the last time we spoke in March, the world was quite different, and the backstop was looking like it was going to come into legislation, and then we had the election, and then all bets were off effectively around that. We are still hopeful that the backstop will happen. It will just happen at a slightly different timescale to what we originally thought. So we are still anticipating that that will happen. The reason I raise that is we can continue to do as much work as possible on the 23-24 financial statements, but hopefully members will appreciate that there is a process that needs to be followed, and we can't sign opinions on 23-24 without opinions being signed in prior years. So just so that you're sort of aware of that, and that there's a process that needs to be followed. Since issuing the audit plan, we've also had a much more detailed VFM planning meeting with our VFM specialist team, and I did speak with the Director of Finance around that earlier this week, and actually introduced her to the person doing the work on VFM. So that again is still scheduled to go ahead as planned. It's probably the important thing for members of this committee is to note that still we have not identified any significant weaknesses at this stage, and then we will go through into the detailed work and report back in a much more detailed way later. So I was going to sort of stop there really, and then just highlight that the pages from sort of 7 onwards are very much for your information. And I wasn't going to particularly talk those through in any details, but I'll probably stop there, Chair, and if there are any further questions.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And while we've got the papers here and many headlines, and also I do acknowledge that the change of external auditor, and it probably hasn't been the best handover, which is through no fault of either necessarily this council or yourselves. I just want to put that down. It hasn't necessarily been the easiest of transition, and that needs to give confidence back to the committee as well. And equally, while that has been the way it has, and the handover has probably not been the best as an organisation would have wanted, that can't relieve us of scrutinising these matters either. Just going into some of the papers, and I know there's some like national headlines here, and obviously I understand that there has been local and national elections that have taken place, but just on page 18, and where it says state of the locals, and then there's a table on there which says state of locals extract. Who do the public think are responsible? UK government, local council, your local councillors. I still think with that it's a shame that there is no statement of where anyone's taking some kind of personal responsibility, because the government, local or national, cannot solve everything. And while I understand the thrust of where the LGIU are coming from, we can get a little bit too centric there. And then where it says in the 3rd paragraph down on page 18, for new members joining local government for the first time and the more experienced members starting or continuing their term, it's worth reflecting the findings. But members know their communities really well. And so while people highlight some of the higher level stuff, we do know our communities well. And equally, I think a councillor's role, and can be a council, which I will praise Melton Borough Council on this, is sometimes being closer to your community does mean that you go out of the roles and responsibilities that you are, because you are owning the public space around you. You're trying to shape that. And sometimes I don't think the government, and this is national government, always realise what the power is of localism. And when they talk a lot about localism, but when I say localism, that's also about community groups and people to solve some of these issues which your report is talking about. It can't always be for government to solve, or the council, or local councillors. And I think one of the primary roles of being a councillor is not your interaction with the council. Sometimes it can be your role within the community and some of the issues that you may have with other authorities, which can be the police, the emergency services, and also the health service, which may come up a bit later. But anyway, that's a little bit soapbox. So I'll pass to Councillor Atherton.
Can I just raise an observation on that very same table? Without going and following the link to the State of the Locals 2024 LGIU report, that table in and of itself doesn't mean a great deal because it's missing the legend. And for those who don't have a computer in front of them, the darker area is those who think services are getting worse and who's responsible. So a great deal of responsibility is the darker area and a fair amount of responsibility is the lighter area. But for future reports like this, could we include the legend of what the table actually means, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. We can definitely pick that up. I hadn't spotted it when it came out, so apologies for that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Atherton. And then just on the next page, page 20, housing and homeless, a continuing crisis and new reform. And so this one I'm very passionate about on an individual and councillor point of view is, so while members of the public who may be watching this, anyone who's homeless and presents homeless to this council, it comes off the general taxation of your council tax. And this council needs to ensure that people are protected from homelessness. It's not like other budgets that are protected from the general council tax. So it is a cost. Equally, I think the council is doing something about homelessness, and also, as any other council, could do more, because it could present pressure on the general fund. But equally, housing, again, it's sometimes the tail wagging the dog. The reason housing and homelessness sometimes is in crisis is because we're not making enough homes available. And this society changes, all the other side of that. And part of it is, and I know we have the chair planning, so please, I'm not trying to make this a planning matter, is that's why we need affordable housing. There are parts of it also, which is at the national level, where government needs to ensure that there is a range and a mix of housing for people to get on the housing ladder, whether that be first-time buyers, people who start their lives and communities well, but equally people who have had difficulty and probably have done all the right thing, and then for whatever reason the family unit's broken down, and we need to be there for them. And we need to also make sure that there's funding in place and housing available to make sure that we can, where possible, ensure that it doesn't become a massive burden on the general taxation part. But government's got to make sure that is in place as well. Because if we're not careful, and it won't be just this council, that budget, and I'll probably, if Dawn, you would like to come in on this, is it's something that we can't predict and we can't control, but you have to fund. And if we're not careful, that it could cause an impact on how we fund matters. So, Dawn, I'd like you just to talk about that, if that's okay.
I mean, yeah, homelessness is one of the biggest pressures for district councils at the moment. Obviously, demand-led service, and you know we've got the issues surrounding the funding certainty and how much we get each year, which obviously I've spoken to members before about, and we've got no long-term certainty around our level of funding and how that's distributed. So it is one of the key pressures on all district councils at the current time.
Thank you, Dawn. And yeah, and if anyone watches this or watches in the future on the YouTube channel, that is the problem. Homelessness isn't necessarily how some people think people present as homeless, and it's not people in necessarily a shop window or whatever. Melton doesn't seem to have that type of homeless. It can be sofa surfing, it can be domestic abuse, it can be a whole range of very difficult reasons why someone has to present as homeless. And not only is this council, but all councils, as well as, in my view, government's got to try and work out what's a proper strategy for it. And equally to give people a safe space where it's a ladder to an opportunity of moving your life on, because otherwise it's going to cost the public purse a lot of money. And it's one thing I know I've raised for many years. I'm a bit concerned about how it could affect MBC's public accounts. Over to members for other issues. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. I'm just going to cheekily pick up on your reference to localism earlier, and I don't disagree. I think as much as possible should be devolved to local level to address and solve the problems we have. But to quote Sir Geoffrey Howe, it's no good giving us that power and taking the bat away. And of course, the bat is the funding. And the main driver behind many of the problems we have today is the steady removal of funding over a long period of time from local government. And at the same time saying to local government, here are all the problems, you solve them. And I think we've got to be alive to the fact that powers are great, but there's got to be the appropriate level of funding to actually support us in doing that. So off my soapbox. In terms of questions, I've just got two questions. I mean, one is a straightforward one regarding the outstanding audits for 21, 22, 23. And the simple question is, have we any indication when that is going to materialise?
Short answer is, I mean, we've got 2021 outstanding as well. So 2021, the aim's always been to actually really fully complete that audit and obtain a full audit opinion. 21, 22 and 22, 23, the idea was to have a value for money opinion only and draw a line under those years. But the short answer is no, we're still waiting for our outgoing auditors, Ernst Young, to give us some kind of indication of what their timeline is.
Can I have an assurance they're no longer on our Christmas card list? But thank you for that, Dawn. I just thought it was useful to get it into the record where we are. The other question, it's on page 19 on my screen, and it's the reference to the requirement of the authority to submit a productivity plan to the, I'm not sure, isn't the ex-Department of Levelling Up Communities and Housing, because one of the first actions of this government is to discard the Levelling Up acronym. Two-part question. I mean, has that plan been submitted? I haven't seen it on the website yet, because I know part of the recommendation was it should be put on the website, but that may be me being clunky on the website. But secondly, given there are a lot of changes being mooted, have we any indication of where this particular requirement is going, or whether it might change?
Through you,
Sure.
Chair. Yes, through you, Chair. Yes, we submitted our plan on time. It was approved by Cabinet earlier this month, and I've had confirmation and seen the email that we've submitted that. I did think it would be going directly onto the website, but I will chase that up. And I think, thanks for the prompt, that might be useful to put in the next member's bulletin as well, with a link to where that plan is. So I'll follow that up. With regard to where this is going, absolutely no idea. I would like to think that with a new incoming government, that particularly the last part of that plan was barriers, and I would hope that they would certainly read those plans that have been submitted and look at those barriers and try to use those to perhaps, support local government in delivering high quality services.
Forgive me, but just going back to the absolute basics in relation to the audits for the last 3 years and their effects on the continuing audit responsibility. I mean, clearly there are reasons why the audits aren't done. It isn't simply this council. There are shortages of auditors, I think. But are we potentially, perhaps only in theory, likely to face any form of sanction if we don't actually get the audits done within a reasonable period of time? And in addition to which, would the council potentially in any way be adversely affected because of the fact we haven't got the audits? They're two quite distinct questions. And I think at some stage, particularly if you're dealing with financial institutions and operators, at some stage they might say, well, actually, you know what, you haven't got any, you haven't been audited for years. That's not good, is it? And then at some stage, even though it's not our fault, for the benefit of anybody who may be listening, could we actually be adversely affected by them?
Thank you, Chair. I'll start to answer, and then I'll probably hand over to Helen as well to add to my answer. So, just to reassure members, and for the matter of anyone listening, all of our draft accounts were produced on time by the end of May and published to the website, along with our annual governance statement. And failure to have those audits done is in no way any reflection on the finance team, who, as I say, continue to meet those challenging deadlines, had all working papers ready and were ready to take those audits. In fact, it's been a source of frustration that this has taken up considerable amount of the staff's time responding to repeated requests from the auditors, particularly on 2021, where we're within a glimmer of having completed that audit, and staff have changed from both ends, and we've had to resubmit certain pieces of work a number of times. One of the impacts for us as well, obviously, is that uncertainty. And also as well, it's around audit fees. We've had to accrue or carry forward as appropriate unused budgets for those audit fees for a number of years, which is quite a sizable amount now in terms of the context of our budget, not knowing if that provision is sufficient or whether we've over provided. So it's caused many issues for us, and as I say, it's outside of our control. There's two, and this is where I might need to bring Helen in and she can support me on this. If you have issues with your accounts, the auditor can issue a qualified opinion. And I think what they were talking about was what was called a disclaimed opinion, which meant the auditor had failed to complete their work, despite us having those accounts ready for them along with the working papers. So I would hope that we would be in that position. You're right, the impact on us, apart from the uncertainty and ongoing pressure with the staff, is potential reputational damage, and that would apply to all councils that were in this situation, and there's a great number of them, as you're aware. So I think it is around that. We are occasionally asked by private companies that are not always used to dealing with local government for copies of our accounts in certain transactions, but that is few and far between. But you're right, there could be issues of that kind in some cases, despite it not being anything that we've contributed to. So I don't know whether Helen wants to add to that at all.
Yeah, I will do my best. I think, Dawn, you've pretty much got it covered in terms of where we sit at the moment. This is very much a national issue in terms of where we find ourselves. I think you will see that actually as a firm we've actually done pretty well in terms of signing off prior audits. And our percentage, I think there's a table somewhere in the report that talks about the different percentages, but that doesn't necessarily help the situation that you're in, and I fully appreciate that. I think the key, as Dawn says, is we need that legislation and we need that guidance to enable us to move forward. We are in unprecedented times. What I think all providers are agreed on is we have to find a way to reset the system and get back to a point where everybody is having audited accounts in the right time frame, and that is very much what the backstop is designed to do. You know, while not wishing to sort of talk about politics, in Labour's manifesto, it very clearly said they wanted to reset the local audit system. So we are hopeful that that will progress. We, in terms of 23-24, and I think the councillor sort of alluded to that, the difficulties we will have as your new auditors is we don't have that assurance around the opening balances position. We can absolutely audit the in-year, what's happened in 23-24, but you will recognise that there is, you know, the starting point for those accounts will not have been audited, and as Dawn alluded to, our expectation is that those prior years will have what is called a disclaimed opinion. Every sort of firm will probably come up with a slightly different wording on that, and I think the legislation as it was set out before it disappeared was very much around being clear in those disclaimed opinions about why that opinion is disclaimed. Is it disclaimed because the audit didn't happen because there weren't the audit resources to enable to do that? Was it disclaimed because actually there was an amount of work done and we couldn't get the assurance as auditors? So there will be a different form of wording depending on the situation that you are in. Clearly, I am not the auditor for those prior period, so I can't make a decision in terms of what that wording would look like, but that is the most likely scenario. I think the challenge for us will be how quickly that transpires and what that means in terms of the opening balances work that we do. As a firm, we're really thinking through about making sure that the objectives of the reset are actually achieved, and we will not achieve the objectives of the reset if we then say, well, actually we want to get to a position where we've audited all of the opening balances, because you can appreciate that that's almost like doing 2 audits, which will take resources, will incur a cost. So we are still working through the implication that that might have, but in the meantime we're going to focus very much on what that 23-24 position looks like and wait for the legislation to come in around what those prior years will need to look like. So I'll stop there and see if that helps and answers the questions as raised.
I'm sorry, forgive me, I appreciate it's a very difficult area, and the main difficulty is that the answer is speculative.
Absolutely.
And that's the problem with it. But I would just come back at just briefly on 2 points. I mean, certainly we now understand the significance of a disclaimed opinion. But is there any accepted format of a disclaimed opinion, or is it simply something that the person who's giving the disclaimer drafts themselves for approval? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I understand that, and the auditing standards prescribe the things that we need to talk about in a disclaimed opinion, and so from I can only talk about what we're planning to do as a firm. I can't talk about what EY are planning to do as a firm, but from our perspective, what would happen is we will draft template opinions, so any of our clients that are in that situation, the opinions will look the same. And if we are in a position where the audit hasn't happened purely as a result of resource constraints, let's say, then that's what the disclaimer opinion will say.
Okay. And the only other point I was going to come back to on was the mention you made of additional costs. I mean, potentially, without wishing to be over dramatic about it, I mean, nobody really knows what the additional costs might be because it's all speculative again, isn't it? I mean, can you give us any indication of what we're talking about there?
And the reason I completely understand that, and we don't have any certainty, as you've said, so I'm trying to give you the best I can given the uncertain world that we're working in. So when I talk about costs, we are acutely aware that our audit fees come out of the public purse, and there is no getting away from that. And part of the reset is about making sure that we get to a point where everybody is back on track. And I think as part of our decision making process, what we don't want to be in a position is, you know, clearly if we did effectively an opening balance audit and a main audit, that's almost like 2 audits, and therefore that would incur that cost. We are seeking to not do that, but recognise that that will potentially have an impact on the opinion that we are able to give for 23-24. But I think we're all cognizant of the fact that that might be the best solution. But until we know exactly what the backstop says, what the legislation will say, it's really hard for us to be able to gauge what that might be. Our current intention would be not to do significant work around those opening balances and modify the opinion in 23-24 to try and keep those costs, you know, it pretty much in line with the scale fee. But it's very much, this is pure speculation. So I'm trying to give you as much as I possibly can, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And you know, as things develop, we'll keep up with these progress reports, and if we have further information to give you, then we certainly will. But I can completely understand your point of view and your concerns around that.
I mean, just when you were talking, Councillor, about what that wording might look like in a disclaimed or a qualified opinion, just on generally on external audit reports, obviously they're public documents, they're independent reports. That said, both with Grant Thornton and with EY, they do give us the right of reply at draft stage as well. So you would hope that there would be a collaboration around what is accurate and acceptable, obviously still maintaining auditor independence, and we always have managed to reach some kind of agreement over that's fair and reasonable.
So I'd just like to draw attention to page 22 of our report pack, which is actually page 14 of the auditor's report, the simpler recycling bit. Interestingly, it talks about the DEFRA announcement that was made earlier this year, which I assume will still apply given the change of administration, which is to come to be complicit by the 2026. In it, it talks about the 3-bin arrangement. One of the bins being for organic waste, which is a mix of food and garden waste. Our current arrangement is for households to pay for garden waste collection, which is once a fortnight. Do I assume from the DEFRA announcement that the collection of organic waste will move to weekly as recommended, and that it will be funded by the authority, assuming we get extra money from central government as well to offset the cost, and that from 2026 households will no longer be responsible for paying for the removal of garden waste, notwithstanding the fact that this authority is currently one of the most expensive authorities charging for the collection of garden waste.
Well, if officers want to comment on that, I'll hand over to them ever so shortly. But my cynical view is when it was made, and I think people were asking central government, "Are you paying for it?" I don't think that the answer was a resounding yes, we're paying for it from memory. So obviously, new government, new priorities. I've no idea what the new government's going to do. I don't know how much faith local authorities had that the other government was going to pay for it. It would be great if they would. Yeah. Equally, what I will say is, and going back, and I'll close this up unless there's any other questions coming in. I'll close this paper up. What I will say is, one thing that local authorities are very, very good at is if you have a public pound, it spends it probably one of the most efficient ways compared to other public services. It's not always the most efficient way of spending a pound, is what I will say, and that's why as councillors sometimes we we scrutinise the council, and that's why we're here on audit. And equally, as Councillor Adcock was just saying, is a lot of money is spent on auditors, and are we getting good value for our buck? Well, I think the council has been let down over the years over that, and equally, this isn't to criticise the incoming one. There's a cost because the other one hadn't done, and I know Dawn is holding that organisation to account, and if we can probably have a progress report on that, that would be really helpful. That all said, is I think just ever so quickly, with what happened with COVID, if it wasn't for local authorities up and down the country, regardless of political persuasion, regardless of size, all the other stuff, I don't think government direction, whatever they needed to happen, would have ever done if it wasn't for the infrastructure of local government. I think local government really came into itself on that one. And I know, especially from this council, and I know from speaking to other friends and colleagues in other councils, of how they went above and beyond. And sometimes it's that kind of camaraderie of local government. You can say that about the armed services, which I know, Councillor Atherton, you know very well. It's about just getting on with the job, rather than let's get on with it. And I would say is local authorities, we all can complain about them, and quite rightly, and we all hold them to account quite rightly, and that's what this committee is here for, as I said before. Sometimes probably that's why you become a councillor, because you realise that the council is not doing what you think it should do, and that's a good thing. But equally, going back to this paper, I'd like to thank the external auditors presenting it. I don't mean this in a rude way when I say the comment. It isn't Melton centric. It is relatively high level, which in one way I do expect it to be. I would have thought we could have had a little few stats about Melton. I'm going to get a question in and then I'll close it. But over to you, Councillor Brown, and then I will close this paper off. But my comment to the external auditor, if we have a report like this, maybe just a few local stats would have just been a little bit more helpful. That we weren't just getting a report that probably every other council may have had. I'm not saying they have, but there we go. Over to you, Councillor Brown, and then I'll ask for a proposer and seconder.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, it's partly picking up on Councillor Atherton's reference to the new recycling and waste rules that at the moment we're still assuming come in by 2026, but as with many other things that were enacted just prior to the change of government, who knows whether that will change. But just to make two comments about it. I mean, one is, I hear what he's saying about the way it's laid out here in terms of how waste would be collected and what the implications are for green waste. I'm also rather bemused by the suggestion that there'd be one bin to collect all organic waste, because it's my understanding you don't mix certain forms of organic waste with other forms, and it leads to problems in how that's processed. But that's perhaps why these rules came in for significant criticism, as is said in the preamble. So I think there's a lot of detail in here to be worked out. Just an aside on that, and putting my chair of scrutiny hat on, just for the information of the committee, one of the items we've put into our work programme for this year is actually looking at the waste collection contract. And as part of that, and I know I had it confirmed to me yesterday by the Deputy Chief Executive, we were hoping that the current waste contractor would come and engage with us on that item, and it's been confirmed to me that they're very willing to do that. So some of these questions, particularly about cost, because we could do everything for waste that we wanted to, but it has a cost. And I think some of those issues could be probed through the scrutiny committee, and those members here are also on scrutiny, I'm sure will be part of that, but we're very happy to share on a broader basis with other members.
Thank you. I don't have any papers that's here, which should it be noted or moved?
I think it should say.
I think it's the
Apologies,
note, isn't it?
Chair. Yeah, it's to note. It should have been in the covering.
Yeah,
agenda.
no, that's fine. I think, yeah. So all to note, unless any objections there, we'll just note that one. But thank you, members. And I'll move on to item 5, Chair of Audit and Standards Committee Annual Report, which is very much in my name, and as will be said at full council as well, from page 25 in your packs, and then it's also will be presented at full council here as well. I don't think we need to go too much into it unless, but the self-assessment of good practice, Rachel, thank you very much. She went through this with all members of the Audit and Standards Committee that attended, and that's where the tick sheets are from page 29 to 32, which I think was a very very reflective self-assessment from members. Equally, I was pleased that the committee felt that it was non-partisan, which is really important. And one thing I will say, and what I'm likely to say, I'll just say just ever so briefly here, and I'm happy to take comments or considerations what you may want me to say at full council. So broadly is how Audit and Standards Committee has worked, talking about some of the self-assessment of good practice, equally some of the papers that are there. And if we look at the summary of what we've actually audited and considered, I think some things that we've put on the next year's agenda is going to be really important. And I will talk a little bit about that, but without too much haste, because I think some of the questions may be focused on that. But it was really important, is I believe that audit is one of those committees where councillors and those on the committee can test the council and the leadership of the council. So either that being officers as leadership, those in particular portfolio holders or other particular roles, or the cabinet in itself. Like scrutiny, it is one of those few committees that is there to hold those committees and other areas to account. And as we was talking earlier in the previous paper, it's a little bit looking back on, and it's to give that reassurance not only to ourselves but to our community as well. And I think we did quite well on that last year. And bearing in mind it was a change of administration, equally there was projects that were started and then stopped because of maybe that or budget constraints. And again, what I would say in the next year, because we now have had a change of government, things may start and stop. And what I will say is, as we audit what the council does and expends on behalf of the public, we've only got so much resource, and what our role is to make sure that that resource is doing what we've set out for it to do. Just ever so briefly on standards, which isn't a big feature in here, but what I will say, and has been an absolute priority of mine and Jim Mason, is absolutely to ensure that the standards part of it, and at this moment in time we haven't had to convene a standards part of the committee, is that we are there to ensure that complainant and respondent have utmost confidence in the process of how it runs, and that it will be dealt in a fair and natural justice way. And we've had various reports over the year where any complaints haven't been upheld, but it needs to be that we have retained the full confidence of the public, as well as also members who may be respondents to those. That all said, happy to take any comments or from officers. So I've drafted a few things that I will say at full council. If there are parts where anyone would like me to highlight, I'm very happy to put them in. Councillor Atherton?
So it's an observation more than anything else. In the report body, you list Annex B as being the basis of scoring an action plan, when actually Annex B is titled Self-Assessment against the SIPFA Position Statement 2022. So just an observation.
Yes, yeah, Chair. I was just going to put forward an observation or a question, really. I mean, audit is traditionally linked with standards, but that is not an inevitable way of running things. I just wondered whether you thought that standards should continue to be linked with audit.
On a personal level, and this is just my personal level, I think standards is absolutely separate. I think either through, I'll pass to you, Clive, whether your view is, I don't mind that being, what's the word, reform to be separate, and it may be, but standards tends to be members who are on the audit committee, and we have subpanels, and so in one way it is slightly separate, but it can cloud, because one minute we're dealing with audit and next minute we're dealing with standards, and it's two roles. And as you know, and we've spoke about this offline, is audit is very much holding the council to account, and standards is kind of quasi-judicial role where, and I've said to any member, I'd want you to be absolutely straight if you are going to sit in judgment on anything that comes in, because that is how the council can be perceived. And Alan, being on chair of planning, it's a window into the public, and audit has that whole fiscal responsibility, fiduciary responsibility, all the other stuff. Standards is a role where, if I can, I'm not paraphrasing or making any comment about any potential or past or future standards complaint, but you can be a member of the audit committee and also have erred in the standards world, if that makes sense. And that's why I agree with you. I don't think I think it's harder when it's linked, but that's my personal view.
Chair, but both the audit's function, standards function, and non-executive functions, and therefore fall to be discharged by the council in whatever way it seems fit, and say then that's a council function, so it must appoint appropriate committees to do that. There's no prescribed way of doing that. There's no right or wrong. There are governance arrangements you make internally yourself, depending on what you see as working for the authority concerned. I wouldn't like to comment on the basis I wasn't involved in the process when it was decided to approach it in this way. What I would say is there must have been, for some reason, a decision to amalgamate them, and it might have been just because of the number of committees and the numbers of members available, so it could have been on that basis. I have known authorities where they've had two separate bodies dealing with these, so there is potential clash in any situation where a member who has had a standards allegation upheld against them, they will be remaining as a councillor and sitting making decisions of one type or another. And I don't think that the risk or the problems that can arise in that situation are any greater when it's someone sitting on audit committee. Obviously, it will depend what that member has been found to do in breach of the code of conduct, and I would expect that where the finding of a serious nature, that care would be taken when next appointing committees as to where that member was seen as fulfilling the role appropriately. That's what I could say. I say it is a council function to make the appointments. Obviously, not something we can resolve here or make any changes ourselves, but it might be something that the council wants to consider in the future.
Maybe we could potentially pass comment to the Constitution Working Group, but I mean, standards will fall somewhere, and even if audit and standards were formally separated, we could still find that audit members are still members of the standards committee. But I do agree with Councillor Adcock, because when I approach the paper as your chair, and thank you for appointing me as your chair, being an audit chair and then being a standards chair, two totally different things. And that's why you notice the change in me is where I'm like, I want for standards, it has to be just, we all have to make sure that we're approaching with a clear mind and that we give confidence to the complainant and the respondent. And as your chair, if I feel that any member isn't doing that to both parties, I would want you to take no part in it whatsoever. And that's just my personal view. Councillor Atherton.
So again, just an observation in my short time as an elected member, even though this is the audit and standards or standards and audit committee, I don't think we've ever sat from a standards perspective. I don't know how that compares historically. Not yet. Yep, fine. But if we were to separate into two, would there still be a requirement for regular meetings? In which case, you double the amount of meetings that we need. So I accept the point that maybe it should be two separate committees. But if it's going to be the same people, do we really need two meetings? Or given how infrequently we deal with standards, perhaps we're just fine rolling on as we are.
Yeah, I mean, I'll pass to. I just said to Clive, I'll pass to him in a moment. I mean, any standards matter that comes to a standard, it will go to one, usually standard subcommittee, which will be probably half or a panel of this committee, and then equally they may be the first port of call on that process. And one thing I have asked officers for is I think we absolutely need training. All audit standards members need training and some mock kind of, because if you get it wrong, there's huge reputational damage. And as I've expressed in this, we've got to get it right. We have to provide that confidence. And I'm not saying this for members of 28, which I am one of them, but they must be judged fairly. And that is no fear or favour or partisan, but equally, any complainant must feel that when it goes through that process, that they are also that process is also fair as well. And natural justice must be a key factor in it. That all said, sometimes we will have to, or maybe, approach those matters. And I will acknowledge publicly where I do think the council has made some massive improvements in that process and has been far more clearer of how it should handle those matters. So I have confidence that the process is more robust than maybe it has been in the past. And there are some things which I have said to Clive and various other officers of where I would not want any external interference in. And that's just, I'm not saying it as chair, I just don't believe things should change unnecessarily. It should just be absolutely transparent and fair. But I'll pass to Clive on that, because I think you're right, Councillor Atherton. I don't think we need to stray too far from that, if that makes sense.
Chair, again, the precise arrangements are to be made by the authority, but it's usual for subcommittees to hear individual allegations. There's a number of reasons for that. Sometimes it's for a convenience factor of needing to call ad hoc meetings and therefore getting the whole committee to sit at sometimes quite short notice can be difficult. And there can also be a good reason to limit the number of members simply in case they have any because of any potential connections to issues concerned, so that as long as there's a fair hearing, that is the key consideration. So by comparison to matters such as licensing, whilst the legislation is different, that's again quite a usual practice to operate efficiently but still provide that fair hearing. In relation to training, that's being sourced. We did have a discussion around this a little while ago. Unfortunately, election got in the way and has derailed a number of things. So that will be arranged as soon as possible. There's a consideration of two types of training. One is generally for members to be aware of the Code of Conduct and Standards regime generally, but then an additional part for those who might be involved in adjudicating on allegations, because obviously there's some particular skills in relation to that. So it would be a two-part session to cover both of those.
Yeah. And I'll close on this unless there's I'll go to you in a moment then, Mike. Sorry, I didn't see you there. Just what Clive did say is I have asked for members to have general awareness training of what may be where you could fall foul of it, and equally that's not to try and sort of navigate of how you don't get round of it, but equally there's a way of sometimes where members may just accidentally slip into something that they didn't intend to, and it's all about just being absolutely straight on the line with it rather than doing something really silly, which sometimes can happen. Mike.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, I agree with everything you've been saying about the importance of any process around standards being conducted scrupulously and fairly. Not wishing to burst your bubble, 90% of people whose complaints aren't upheld think it's been unfair.
Oh no, I know
fair
that,
or
yeah.
not. So I think you have to. You have to sort of live with that. But a couple of other points. I mean, just in terms of separating it off, whilst I can see the argument as a group leader, I'm blanching at the idea of having to find people to sit on another committee. And I think we have to recognise the limitations of the resources we have. I also think because thankfully the standards part doesn't come into play too often, that it's almost worse being appoint someone to the standards committee that doesn't have to meet for 2 years, then suddenly you're having to deal with an issue, whereas being part of an ongoing committee is probably better, particularly for new councillors, to get them feeling more confident about what they're doing. So I hear what you're saying. As a member of the Constitution Review Working Group, I think I have to say we're looking for simplifying rather than expanding the structure. And then just finally on the issue of training, I think you're absolutely spot on, and it isn't about understanding the Code of Conduct. I think we all get trained on that anyway. I think it's about understanding how to conduct proceedings of this sort, which is a very different thing. And for all the sad individuals like me who spent most of my working life in tribunals and hearings of various sorts, that wouldn't be daunting. But for a lot of elected members, it'd be something they'd never had to deal with or encounter before. So I think something very specific about how that sort of process works and how you should conduct yourself in it would be very useful.
Yeah, and I'll just close on this. Is you're right. Any information that comes forward, where's it come from? You have to test it, and you have to test it as well. Just because someone says something doesn't mean it's true. You have to test it. Where's it come from? Why has it been said? All the other stuff, and then you have to be confident in where it is. And what I will say is this country still operates in you are innocent until an allegation's proven. Not this where just because someone says something, it has to be proven. As I say, so thank you, members, on that. And I think what I'm confident of what members of this Audit and Standards Committee have said to me is where they feel that they've asked for training, we will get that. And what I will say, Councillor Brown, as a group leader, I have said to Clive Tobin, if a complaint is in, what I have asked that all group leaders, within reason, we don't change committee, like you just said, we don't change committee unless there's like an AGM or something like that, because that undermines the whole confidence or how the process is, because it looks wrong, even if there's a good reason for it. So that's, while I probably can't mandate that, I have said to Clive, I would and Alison before him, I would not like group leaders to alter committees because they can. So that's my view there. So I think that's a noted report. I've taken some of the views there. I will reflect that into what I say at full council. I really appreciate some of the points, especially on the standards, which always takes quite a part of it rather than the audit, but maybe it's because we don't always debate the standards in this committee. So thank you very much, members. So agenda item 6, if I've gotten that right, is it 6? So information governance update, which I think is yourself, Clive. So pages 37 to 40. Over to you, Clive.
Thank you, Chair. This is a report for noting on the actions undertaken since the approval of the Information Governance Framework in September of last year. It's worth mentioning the introduction of this report that whilst much of the legislation in this area has been around in one form or another for quite some time, there are still some amendments following the Brexit legislation in the transition of the EU data regime into domestic law. So after quite a number of years of changes, we're still experiencing a few of those, which unfortunately can frustrate the work that there's been done in this area, because no sooner have we addressed it than we have another little change to pick up again. The information governance framework is based on guidance document from the Information Commissioner regarding having clearly set organisational structure for dealing with information governance matters. So following the adoption of this in September last year, there's been a slight change that I am the Council's Senior Information Risk Owner, and the Legal Services Manager is now the Data Protection Officer. So they're two slightly different functions, which are there to achieve the same objective. However, there is a slightly more strategic aspect to my role compared to the Data Protection Officer's role. Following the adoption of the framework, there have been a number of policies and processes which have been reviewed and amended. The Freedom of Information and Environmental Information Regulation Procedures and Guidance internally have been amended, as have the Data Protection Policy and the Individual Rights Procedure and the Records and Retention Disposal Policy. So that work has been undertaken by officers through the Information Governance Working Group, which is a solely officer group, but that group does report into the appropriate parts of the authority where there may be an effect. So, for example, if it's a policy related to staff, that will go through Joint Staff Working Group, etc., so that the appropriate parts of the authority are aware of those changes. The apologies, I've just missed something. An audit has just commenced in relation to the revised records retention and disposal policy. So that's ongoing. So that will be a good first test of the revision of that and how it's bedding in practice. The next item is that training has been provided to quite a high number of officers as recommended when the framework was adopted. That I think the number so far is 57 staff members. There is further training planned. It's very difficult to catch everybody in 1 or 2 sessions, so that's ongoing. But that's something that we are ensuring we roll out, because whilst people will receive training on joining the organisation, that training needs to be updated, and particularly when we have when we have changes to individual policies and processes, then that needs to be embedded. So further training has taken place. That's been held internally with face-to-face and Teams sessions, and that's been run by the council's information governance lawyer, who's been leading on this work. It's worth mentioning that going hand in hand with these changes, we also have a system for dealing with subject access requests and freedom of information requests. That's shortly due to be implemented. That's called the House on the Hill system, which will streamline a lot of the admin around this. And what that will do is it will make things a little easier for the staff involved to be dealing with the substance rather than the admin side of things. And again, once that becomes online, training will be given so that that can perform at its optimum. And then the final part of that framework is about regular reporting back to members on performance. That takes 2 forms. It's updates such as this, where we tell you, if you like, the headlines, the developments of policies, processes, etc. But then there is, as part of the performance indicator reporting framework, we have statistics being regularly reported to members, for example, on the compliance with subject access requests, freedom of information requests, etc., so that members can be aware of the levels we're attaining, which are generally very high. But say that's not the subject matter of this report, but I can, if members require, direct them to that information if they want to consider that. Thank you, Chair.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Clive. Just briefly before I open it out, is what I do know with some individuals who've had subject access requests to the council, and I only know of 2 members of the public. Both in the instances have said that they were told that they wouldn't get the information within 30 days, but not told why. And really, I would have thought they should have been told it was complex. And personally, from the request I saw them making, I didn't think it was complex. So I think from those 2 individual cases, I have told them just to keep pressing with the matter, and whether the council is going to deal with that, that's up to the council. But officers can't hide behind by not dealing with something in I think it's 28 days, and then just say, oh well, I can take up to 3 months or the 90 days because the legislation says it does. Because you have to say, 1, it's complex. You have to explain why it's complex, and we can't hide behind that. Thank you for the update. And I think it's really important that we understand of how information is being protected, which I think the council does really, really well, from what I understand. So while that was something I wanted to get out there as well, how we protect individual rights as well. In the past, many years ago, this council ended up accidentally printing, I think, was it taxi drivers' information many years ago, and it made a BBC report. And I think Tony Rowe was the BBC journalist on that one, and I think we've come a world away from that. So there's lots of things on there, and that particular instance was probably 20 years ago. So I think staff members know their responsibilities about what data protection is and how we uphold that. Freedom of information and EIR procedures and guidance. I always find that really interesting with the EIR, because that's environmental, and apparently you could get there's more information you may be able to extract out of council. Not necessarily this council, could be Leicestershire County Council or any other public body, as I understand. Equally on that. But if we've got that framework in place and we offer that confidence that we're protecting people's information, and we uphold their individual rights, which is at 5.4, and we have the records of retention and disposal policy, and disposal is equally as important as well, how we delete information, because that's also can be where danger can happen to individuals, because we have criminals who want to seek people's personal information, and the reason being is this council probably owns a lot of personal information about sometimes very vulnerable people, has customers, has their household data, has bank data, all the other stuff, and could be a particular source of attack. And we've and this council, I know the chief executive has said that he wants us to ensure we are robust in protecting people's data, hasn't he, Clive?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think being affirmed by members, particularly, or say not least through the adoption of the framework. But yeah, that's something that, is given paramount importance. And I don't know if it is the historical issue that you refer to, which is the sort of catalyst for that being, spoken about in those terms. But it may just be the recognition of these obligations which we have, which are imposed by statute, and we have seen examples of other bodies falling foul of these. So it's learning from their mistakes, I think, is perhaps raising the profile and within the organisation.
So forgive me if I misheard. Did you say that we'd had requests under freedom of information requests that, excuse me, that have been rejected, but no reason why provided?
I was talking about, so I've been made aware of from individuals of the public 2 subject access requests, and in both instances they were expecting it within a month, and right at the end they were told it would be over, it would take up to 3 months. But I have, and I don't mind if the members of the public want me to share that, they haven't suggested that, but I would have thought the council would have, or the officers replying to them would have explained why, because I believe that the Information Commission says you have to explain why you need 3 months. Right. You can't just say I'm taking 3 months. You need to explain why, and it's usually a complex reason, which the Information Commissioner says what's complex, which usually could be medical records, children's records, all the other stuff. You can't just say it because it's a hassle.
No, that's all right. I then in that case, I did misunderstand or mishear what you were saying, because refusal for a subject access request carries with it certain criteria that you must meet. One of those is to provide a reason why you rejected it, and those reasons are quite limited. But if it was the reason why the extension had been kind of enforced in providing a response has not been given, that's slightly different. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, one could be a criminal offence if you don't comply, and I'm aware of people who don't comply like with that, which is a criminal offence. Like you say, for the extension, I think that's probably understanding, if that makes sense. I think that's understanding. The legislation says I could take 90 days. It actually doesn't quite say it like that. It says it has to be complex, but you have to explain why it's complex, and you can't just always go to that. That's not your go-to. But yeah, you work in a similar field I work in, so within that, and that's why, again, going back to it, I think we've got to have confidence that we're being straight with those who are seeking to uphold their data protection rights.
Chair, obviously we're not here to comment on individual cases, so I can't do that. But there are very specific grounds on which you can extend times under both the Freedom of Information Act and data protection. So I couldn't comment on what was or wasn't in those responses, but ordinarily from my previous experience in other authorities and from what I've seen here so far, that those extensions relied upon in a very small number of cases, and it will be very clear why they're relied upon. Sorry, I said exemptions, I mean extensions. It's very clear why they're relied upon, so that will go hand in hand. Having decided that the condition applies, it will be explained. So obviously outside of this can look at those particular matters, but that would be the exception rather than the norm.
Yeah, thank you. I wouldn't have publicly mentioned the comment if I didn't think it was right to. As I say, I in these cases, and I won't mention the particular cases, but there are some still failings. That's what I'm saying, because in my view, so I think we need to just generally look at that. Happy to talk offline on that one, but I wouldn't have raised it in a public forum if I wasn't confident of what I was saying. And that's the point of audit standards, I think, just to hold the council to account. And as I say, I think it's on the minority. I just wanted to say that as well. I don't think it's majority. I think that's a minority as well. But if there are any other comments, I think this report's to be noted as well, Clive. Yeah, thank you very much, members. And we've got another note, and Rachel, thank you for waiting patiently there. So I'll, without further ado, I'll go straight to yourself. Agenda item 7, which is your the internal audit report and the opinion. Just what I would like you to highlight is, maybe in your discussion to the committee as well, is some of the points on page 57 as well, but you've got other points that you may have wanted to raise, but I thought page 57 was a really highlighting part of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and sorry not to be with you today. Thank you for allowing me to attend virtually. I have tested positive for COVID, so I thought it was probably best in everybody else's interests for me to attend virtually today. So the first report that I'm bringing to you today is the annual internal audit report for 2023-24. So I'll just talk members briefly through the report, and obviously be happy to take any questions. So you, as I am required under the public sector internal audit standards, as your head of internal audit, I must provide an annual opinion on the council's governance, risk and control framework. So that provides one of your key sources of independent assurance that should inform your annual governance statement for the year. And my opinion is primarily based on the outcome of the audit work that we've delivered during those 12 months. And that's why it's really important that we set the right risk-based internal audit plan at the start of the year, which we then obviously deliver and report back to you on. So my opinion is provided within the full report. So the full report starts from page 45 of the papers, and my opinion is on page 47 in the box. So I've given a moderate assurance opinion, which is defined within the report, and is in line with the internal audit charter that this committee approved and was applied during 23-24. Then within the report, I've set out the basis for how I've reached that audit assurance opinion. So Table 1 and Table 3 provide an overview of the outcome of the audit assignments that we delivered during the financial year. So Table 1 is more of a summary, and Table 3 provides a breakdown of the 3 types of assurance opinion we've given on each of the audit assignments that were finalised. As the committee will note, the majority of these were reported throughout the financial year as part of my progress reports. So most of those assurance opinions have already been seen and discussed in audit reports previously, but everything else that had been finalised since I had to produce the last audit committee papers are included within the progress report later on this evening as well. So you do have the full oversight of all of those audit reports throughout the year. So as I've said, the opinion I've given is sort of moderate, and I think that reflects that overall you haven't received any assurance opinions that have been under moderate assurance during 23-24. So no opinions of limited assurance, which is a really nice place to be, and it's an improvement on the previous years. The reason the overall assurance opinion remains at moderate, I suppose, rather than higher, is that we still have a number that have a medium organisational impact assurance opinion, which is that third column that you'll see in table 3 on page 52. So those do have some impact on the overall assurance opinion. And also, one of the other things I take into consideration when I reach my opinion is the implementation of audit recommendations as well. So where we're finding any areas for improvement as part of an audit, whether that's the design of a control or compliance with them in practice, we usually make a recommendation and an action is agreed. If that action's not implemented in a timely manner, that obviously impacts on the assurance I can take from the audit process and the outcome of that work. So during 23-24, the implementation rate for audit recommendations was 60%. And again, I have given you further details of that within the report. And it is something, of course, that I have reported to this committee throughout the year as well. And I know has been an area that the committee has flagged as well as an area for attention. So table 4 on page 53 provides further details on that implementation rate. And there is also then a further table which provides a breakdown of those actions which were overdue at the end of March. So just to reiterate, that table is a snapshot as at the 31st of March 2024. I won't go into that in any further depth because you have actually got an updated position on that in the progress report later on this evening. So this was, as I say, a snapshot as at the 31st of March to inform the audit assurance opinion overall. So also within the report is an overview of the performance of the internal audit service ourselves. So we have provided you with some feedback on areas that where we've delivered throughout the year. The feedback of audit clients in table 5 on page 55 is I'm really pleased to see as the head of the service that every rating we've received has been of either good or outstanding, which is really positive to see. I've also noted some of the comments that we've received. We've looked at some of the areas where we've added value, and we've also considered our self-assessment against the public sector internal audit standards as well. And I've made some reference there to the global internal audit standards, which will, again, I'll come on to on a later agenda item. So also within the report is an update on counter fraud activity. So we do not lead on all of the council's counter fraud activity. So anything within the revenues and benefits service would generally be managed within that team, but they may look for some support at some times. But what we do manage is the council's report fraud mailbox. And we also contact on things like whistleblowing as well. So what we tend to do is maintain the fraud log, and members of staff or anyone who makes a referral, that's all logged, anything that comes through to us. And we record that and record any outcomes, the conclusion of any investigation work into that as well. So what I wanted to do was give you an update on that for the full year. So you'll find that in section 6, table 7 provides the statistics on page 57. And that just breaks down the referrals that we received and the types of referrals those related to, the number that have been closed of those 10 referrals and the outcome of those as appropriate as well. Obviously, we do anonymise these. We don't go into detail on individual cases. But you can see one there around a direct debit fraud, which obviously wasn't something that relates to an individual, and that has been fully recovered. And that was actually quite reassuring in terms of that being picked up straight away through the bank reconciliation process. And that personally gives me some reassurance around the effectiveness of that process as well. So that's also, as I say, within the report, and also an update on the National Fraud Initiative activity as well, and some positive outcomes from the last exercise. We are now looking ahead to the next biannual exercise, which I'll be supporting the council with preparing for as well. And again, we'll obviously continue to give you further updates on this in future periods. So that's just a walkthrough of the key sections of the report. As I've said, there's a few reports that have been finalised since the last progress report, but those are all included here. And as I've said at the start, this should be a key source of assurance for your annual governance statement, which obviously is also on the agenda today. And I'm happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and yeah, and thank you for the in-depth coverage of that and explaining, in your professional opinion, where the council's done really well on. Before I pass to councillors, just briefly on page 52, which is page 8 of the summary report. Very pleased to see the landlord health and safety is good, low, and that's all green, and that was November 2023. The levelling up fund, which is getting a lot of attention, quite rightly, there's a lot of public money going in there, is because obviously the issues could be substantial, which it says in the highlights there, but that's all green. And I know members have been really engaged on that one to make sure the levelling up fund's working. One thing which I think this council's done relatively well on, and again, where you've picked up where I think a gut feeling is the Section 106 agreements, which are amber, and again, that's not necessarily always down to the council because of how things are. But what I do know that can happen to councils, that if they do not follow up on the Section 106 agreements, it either falls through, is handed back to developers, and there have been other authorities which have had very adverse headlines through that. That hasn't happened to this council, so I just want to make that on the public statement there. But you've rated that as amber. I would like to know why that's on amber. And obviously the March 2024. But other than that, I think that table is there. Now, I'm very happy if members ask some questions and Rachel then comes back with all that. So I'll go to Mike.
It's about table 4, Rachel, which is summarising where things are in terms of implementing recommendations. And I was struck by the fact that, and I haven't done the maths in my head, but proportionally, we're much better at dealing with medium priority and low priority recommendations as opposed to the high priority ones. And I just wonder whether that's possibly due to the bigger challenges and complexities of issues. And if that's the case, I'm not sure the table gives a fair reflection on how things are being processed. I'm not quite sure how you would do it, but I think understanding, I know one of them is in the high priority. Of course, we've got something on further down the agenda. Some reflection on why some things are taking longer to progress would be useful.
I think.
Rachel, I'm going to ask the members to ask all the questions, and you could probably come back on them all if that's okay, or unless you would prefer on an individual basis. It's up to you. Okay, Ian, if you'd like, ask Rachel.
Useful. Sorry. I do find this kind of thing really useful to me, to give me a snapshot in time as to where we're at. What's missing for me, though, is any feeling as to whether we've got better or, dare I say it, got worse. So for next year, if we could include something that shows the trend, for me personally, that would be of in some ways more benefit than the raw stats of the snapshot in time.
Councillor Atherton, I know you're a very good advocate of that, and I agree with you. And yeah, so I'm sure if that can be noted, Catherine, and because obviously committees change all the other stuff, but that's a really good point. So yeah, I'll take that. Any other questions or Jim?
Now, forgive me, because this is it's right on the edge of what you're addressing us on today. But I'd just like to raise it just out of interest. I mean, clearly there are issues with IT security that are in.
Oh yes.
Yes.
It's not just that we don't want to have any debate. Can we not refer to the subject matter either, and we'll cover that under Appendix B, please?
Okay.
Thank you, Dawn. So Rachel, over to you with unless there's another question for Rachel, and then Rachel, if you'd like to fire ahead on those points that were raised, and thank you for that, Dawn.
Okay. So thank you, Chair. So in terms of those questions, and just working through them. So in terms of the high priority actions, I think what I would just emphasise is that I suppose with the high priority actions, those are ones that do expose a high risk until they are completed. So generally, those would be the ones we would expect a shorter time frame to be set for actually. And in usual, we wouldn't want that to be open for a long period. So generally, I would say we would expect a shorter time frame rather than as you say, they may be larger actions, but they should be priority. So what I'd also mention in terms of those, obviously we're given the breakdown, and those high priority actions are actually ones that have been on the committee's agenda throughout the year, so you had seen those details. And as we know, some of them actually almost developed into bigger tasks. So we had the intensive housing management one, for example, that rather than just do the quick fix, I suppose it was initially agreed that it evolved into a whole service plan review, a whole review of the service, and ended up in a complete change to how things were delivered. So sometimes that can change over time and actually becomes a better action perhaps than it was originally. But what I would also emphasise is that all of these actions, the timeframes have been set by the officers responsible. So we do not enforce a timeframe on officers. So they do need to be setting a timeframe that is reasonable given the scale of the task and what they think is deliverable. As I say, if it was a long way off, we might actually challenge that because of the high level of risk that's exposed. So that would be something that management team would probably have some input on as well. But I suppose that would be my comment on those high priority actions, that would just be a little bit wary of having setting too long a date on those. In terms of the trends, I just wanted to mention what we do try to give that comparator. So in table 1, at the bottom of table 1, there is a comparator there. We always have the comparator from the previous year. So you can see the comparison with the previous year's stats. So obviously we do always include that. What I would say is it's quite difficult sometimes to have a direct compare and contrast because we are doing different audits every year. We're not, now that we have a modern risk-based audit approach, we're not doing the same audits year in, year out. So it's not a direct comparison. It's also quite difficult, and I do have a lot of councils that ask me for comparators from other local authorities. And again, it's quite difficult to make that a reasonable comparison. Sometimes it gives you a feel, but actually we might have looked at something really tricky in one of those councils this year. We might have looked at some higher risk areas in that particular period at one authority more than others. So whilst we'd give it a try and try to give a general trend in that bottom row of table 1, I'm always quite wary of giving direct comparisons, and it more just gives you that overall feel, I suppose. But hopefully that is helpful. In terms of the Section 106 audit, that was focusing on the monitoring arrangements for Section 106 monies, and this was something that I reported back to you at the March committee, and I know we had a bit of a discussion about then. So we continue to follow up on the actions from that, but essentially it was about strengthening those monitoring arrangements to make sure that when trigger points are hit, we are taking the appropriate action, and that we also have that clear oversight of the money that needs to be recovered, the money that has been recovered, and what needs to be spent, what hasn't been allocated, etc. So there was a number of actions that came out of that around improving the oversight and reporting to senior leadership team, for example, as well. So I hope that helps answer some of those questions, but I'd be more than happy to clarify further if needed.
No, I'm happy. Alan, as chair of planning, are you happy with Rachel's response there as well?
Yes, I'm happy with that statement. I mean, one of the things to put into context is the 106 agreements that we discuss in the planning committee are always going to be several years in the future. So the ones we're talking about here is almost an enforcement and making sure which is the ones that are important to us in the next fiscal year.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. And I know Alan is as chair of planning is really abreast of a lot of that detail as well, and works very hard to support the officers there. So Rachel, that's really helpful. I know the recommendation is to note the internal report. Unless there's any other comments, I'll accept that as noted, and we'll move to agenda item 8, which is on page, forgive me here, page 61, which is the draft annual governance statement for 23-24. So this is from Clive and also Dawn here, and it is also a note to the Council's draft annual governance statement for 23-24 as set out in Appendix A on the report. Just ever so briefly, I think with the main considerations that's set out in section 5, and then we have the annual governance statement. If there are any questions in advance, I'll take those questions now. Otherwise, I'll hand over to officers. Yep, I'll hand over to Clive first, and then Dawn, if you want to follow up.
Thank you, Chair. As members are probably aware, and as set out in the report, the provision of the annual governance statement goes hand in hand with our accounting requirements at year end. So the governance statement is a review of the effectiveness of its systems of internal control, and that includes several sort of headline components related to the strategic direction and vision of the council, effectiveness of its corporate systems, processes and controls, how it engages with and leads the community, monitoring whether strategic priorities and outcomes were achieved, whether services are effectively and or delivered cost effectively, how make sure appropriate arrangements for risk management are in place, and ensuring that it complies with the statement on the role of the Chief Finance Officer. Although this is produced annually, there's an ongoing process which underlies this and allows it to be compiled, and this is ongoing throughout the year, which takes a number of different forms. These are set out in paragraph 5.4, and that includes both internal and external audit reports, director and manager assurance, review of local government ombudsman reports, consideration of performance management, financial control assurance, keeping risk registers up to date, any other external inspection reports, and legal and regulatory assurance. The senior council member and the chief exec ultimately sign off the statement, but as well as those processes I've just mentioned, all senior officers, corporate directors and service managers also feed into this process for their individual service areas. So members can be assured that it contains a reflection of those controls across the authority. One of the difficulties that we have was touched upon earlier in the report of the external auditor, that whilst this goes hand in hand with the council's annual accounts, the fact that we have several years of accounts that are yet to be signed off means that we potentially have some knock-on amendments to annual governance statements to reflect any findings from the external auditors. That will apply in any single year, but of course there may be a need to go back and look at some of those matters covered in previous years as well. In terms of the document itself, this has been updated to reflect the council's amended corporate priorities and vision for to 2024 to 2036, which restates the core values and sets out the strategy and those 6 priorities, which I'm sure members are aware of. The document set out on page 66, I think it is, sorry, 67. And I just want to draw members' attention to a couple of headline parts of that. The key parts are, excuse me, I'm scrolling through. That's to be found on page number 91, which is the reflection on previous areas for improvement from last year. Comments are made there in terms of progress, which members may wish to consider. And then the final part is a consideration of areas for improvement in this year and the reasoning for that. Part of the reason for presenting this to this committee is to enable members to observe the content and make any comments upon it. And as mentioned, once the accounts are finally audited, there may be feedback from the external auditors before the final version is published. So it remains, whilst in draft form and underpinned by detailed processes, it does remain a document that's subject to final amendment. So rather than read from the individual matters set out there, it's probably easier if members have any particular questions, particularly on those 2 last parts of the statement. I can take questions from that and go into further detail.
Thank you, Clive. I don't really have a question, just obviously on 93, that some areas of improvement, but I think at the bottom where it's the growth and regeneration, and it just says the resource and governance associated with the large-scale project of the Levelling Up Fund and UK SBF received positive assurance from internal audit, which I know Rachel gave earlier in the year. What I think is really important is how that paragraph ends. The scale and the amount of external funding with and this is the important part, stringent grant conditions and the complex partnership arrangement make this a high risk area for the council. Obviously, what's been reported in recently in the Melton Times, it is disappointing that one of the partners can't deliver on that. But I do want to make it very clear that it isn't that this council has removed or taken away funding from those partners. But equally, while this report is written, I think it highlights those kind of issues. Alan, you. Oh yeah.
Sorry, because it's a different point. Okay. On page 93, the growth and regeneration. Oh, actually, they're all growth and regeneration. It's about the appeal planning committee's decision. I think that statement's been consolidated and it's now misleading, because the appeal, the planning commission's decision taken against officers' advice is immaterial. That shouldn't be there. But there is a risk of a cost award against the council. That's a high risk, and that is one issue that should be there. But then it leads into a potential for government intervention if an acceptable number of adverse findings against council planning decisions. That's not related to that risk. That's a different risk. And that actually is making it sound like it is part of the same risk, and it's not. And also that's making the overall part of it is making it sound like the committee is not allowed to make a decision against officer advice, which is absolutely wrong, because that's the reason for a committee. If we weren't allowed to go against an officer's advice, we wouldn't need the committee. It would be pointless. But the second part, that measurement and whether the planning department or the planning committee were to be measured and therefore investigated by the inspector, it would be on the appeals that are made against them. So whether there's an appeal that is successful against the planning committee or against a delegated decision made by the officers, that would be a necessary risk. But we've combined three things, in my view, into that one statement and made it into a misleading statement that if, for example, if we were to lose a single appeal, even be it a large one, that we would be immediately investigated, which is not the case. As far as I'm aware, the ratio of winning appeals to losing appeals is not a subject of concern at this moment in time. So therefore, I think that statement is misleading. I think the risk of a very large appeal, which we're currently working towards, is a risk, but the others aren't a risk in this context.
Well said there, Alan. Yeah, I think when you look at it in black and white, it isn't probably the best written statement. So maybe officers could probably work with you about that before it, because this isn't signed off yet, is it? Part of this is for feedback before it's signed off. Is that right, Clive?
That's the purpose, as indicated. This will ultimately not be signed off until after this year's accounts have been signed off. So as I said, it's a movable feast.
Yeah, so I'll come to it in a moment, Councillor Brown. Yeah, so I think if maybe they could probably work with you, Councillor Thwaites, because I will always say is we're going to have some of these real big issues that are coming up, and you know, as chair of planning, as a ward member, I know as some of the questions that's coming up at full council on there. Members operate sometimes in a different sphere. On planning, as we all know, if you are on planning, it's not your personal opinion. You're in a quasi-judicial role, which we talked about a little bit earlier on standards, and I'm sort of saying this for any members of the public are or want to ever watch this in the future. That said, there have been, even before I was a councillor, planning decisions which were recommended by planning officers for permit, which is a massive wind turbine on Asfordby mine, 2 wind turbines in my ward, 3, 4 in fact in my own ward, and the committee went against the officer recommendation or went to appeals, and in those cases the appeals were upheld. The appeals weren't upheld. The committee was seen to have done the right thing. The committee doesn't always get it right. Sometimes the committee, according to a government inspector, gets it wrong. But equally, as I think you were saying, Alan, sometimes officers do. It's a decision. Sometimes we don't get it right. I'll go to you first, and then I'll go to Councillor Brown. But over to you, because I think you need some input in that, and you need
I'll just pick you on one point. It's not whether the officers are right or wrong. The officers are bound by planning rules and planning conditions, and the view that they give and the recommendation they give is always the official one, whatever their own personal feelings are. So we shouldn't sort of say that they're right or wrong. They're giving the information that as far as they're concerned, they are bound to give.
Thanks for correcting me. You're using far better language than I've just given there, and you're right on that. And yes, and sometimes the government inspector comes in and says, "No, I'm deciding this," and that's the way it is. That's the system we have. But I don't. I agree with you. I don't like the wording. It feels as if it's a little bit prescriptive. I'll be generous in saying. Mike, and then I'll go to Ian. Sorry, Mike was. Unless it was just on that direct point, Ian.
Well, mine is as well.
Oh, yours is. Well, I'll go that way. Sorry, Mike.
I mean, Councillor Thwaites has raised the issue already, but I'd marked it, before the meeting, and I have to say I'm extremely unhappy with the inclusion of the words "taken against officers' advice" in this report. I would be equally unhappy if a report was written saying councillors acted on bad advice received from officers. You know, that's not how we should be representing the decisions taken by this council. And I think, you know, I would ask for that wording to be removed, or my feedback is that those words need to be removed and shouldn't appear in this sort of report in that way.
So notwithstanding this one very expensive appeal, because those of us that are involved in planning know which one we're talking about. Well, it's going to be expensive whether we win or lose. It's going to be expensive. Do we have any stats in relation to how many appeals are made, and there, as a result, how many are successful, how many are not, how many are still pending, which may go some way to inform the level of risk, that one issue aside?
We do, and we used to. Alan will say further.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I can't give you exact numbers at this moment, but it was a discussion that I had on Monday to sort of say we can actually look at how we're improving, or whatever with the committee and with the planning department as well, to say how successful we are in making the right decision in the view of the inspector, and based on appeals. And that's one of the metrics, which maybe hasn't been, but it will be going forward.
And if you don't mind indulging, a planning committee member who spoke against closing the Horseshoes pub in Asfordby, the committee refused that, went to an inspector, they overturned it, sort of admonished the committee a little bit. But what I will say, because then I took the time to read what the officers had put in, and all the comments the committee had made, and I made some very strong ones, of, you know, a village hall is not a pub is not an allotment, and so a community asset is totally different. The officers fought it absolutely as the committee had said. And I thought, and if you read what the officers had put in, bearing in mind they had recommended to be permitted, and the committee didn't see it that way, the officers fought the way the committee had instructed, and I thought they couldn't have done any better. I still don't agree with the government inspector, and I'm happy to go on public record. I don't agree with that, with how they've come to their conclusion, but they didn't agree with me either, and that's democracy, or that's the way of the world. But I'll just say that. But what I would like to say is the officers fought that appeal absolutely how the committee asked them to do, and I thought what they wrote was the strongest possible case, and costs weren't awarded. So, because I don't think the committee made such an error, and obviously the inspector didn't think we made such an error of it. But anyway, I think that's noted, unless there are any other comments are coming in. Okay, thank you. Now, we're coming up to 2 hours. We're on item 9, we've got item 10. Does anyone want a comfort break before? No, that's fine. And no, that's fine. So we've got the Global Internal Audit Standards. That's a really hefty title there, Rachel. We've got, again, we are noting the main changes, implications arising from the Global Internal Audit Standards. Rachel, over to you, but you'll have to explain the Global Internal Audit Standards as well, because it's coming up to 8:30, and how all that paper is. I don't think I'm going to raise any particular points for you to clarify other than that one, but over to you, Rachel.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So really the purpose of this paper tonight was just a bit of an early heads up, I suppose, for the committee. So it's still quite early days in terms of the guidance on this. But I just wanted to make sure that you were aware as soon as possible of a change to the internal audit standards. So as a committee, you will hear me regularly refer to the public sector internal audit standards in my reporting to you, which is essentially sets the way in which we deliver your internal audit service. So we apply those standards in the way that we work and the way that we report. So any change to that, obviously, I felt it's something that this committee needed to be aware of, but also the standards do have implications for the role of the audit committee as well. So that's quite a focus of the paper that I brought to you today as well, because I thought that's really where we need to focus at this point. So, as I've said, since the last few years, we've always referred to the public sector internal audit standards since they were introduced quite some years ago now. But in 2025, the new global internal audit standards will come into force. Now, these have been introduced by the Institute of Internal Auditors, and under previous regimes, that we've then had the public sector version in the shape of the public sector internal audit standards. What we're being told at the moment is that there will not be any new public sector internal audit standards, but rather we will be given some advice and some support from professional bodies such as CIPFA on how to apply their new global internal audit standards within a public sector and particularly a local government setting. So those standards globally come in from January 2025, and so far we've had this information through, which is what I've based the guidance on this evening. A number of the elements of these new standards are quite prescriptive. There was consultation on them over the last year, and I know that some professional bodies felt that they were almost a step backwards in some respects. But I think one of the key things is that there are some elements which just do not directly translate into local government in particular, and particularly around that domain 3, and that's where we're looking for some additional guidance. But I just wanted to give you initial insight into some of the key implications of the new standards. And as I said, particularly around that domain that impacts on the role of the audit committee. So I won't go through it in detail at this point, but what I would suggest is that once we get more guidance through later in the year, I'd be more than happy to have a further session with the committee, perhaps outside of a formal meeting, so we could have more of a discussion as well. I'd be more than happy to do that. And that's something that I've agreed with other committees that I will be doing later in the year. I actually attended a session last Monday with CIPFA's lead for governance to try and get a little bit more insight into what's happening, because given the timeframes, we really need some advice. And they have indicated that they will be going out to consultation on some advice around the implications of the standards and how we apply them in local government at the end of September. Seems to be the earliest we would expect that, and then obviously we'll see what comes out of that following the consultation. So I would hope to perhaps have something later in the autumn and to be able to give you further information at that point. Just as an overview, I don't think fundamentally the standards change a great deal of how we deliver your service. The fundamentals of internal audit still remain for me around independence, integrity, professional due care, making sure that we have those key foundations of how we operate. And that really seems to be the basis for these new standards as well. I think the issue is that some of them are quite prescriptive in how that applies. So just to take an example of something that's not directly relatable into local government, one of the suggestions is that the audit committee should be involved in the performance management of the chief internal auditor, for example. And within local government, that simply isn't how we operate. Members and committees do not have a role in staff management, and it wouldn't be appropriate to do so. So we're just waiting to understand how that needs to be applied in a local government setting, and that's what CIPFA will be hopefully supporting us with in terms of some guidance from them. So CIPFA have also, since I produced this draft report for you, since I had that briefing last week and that meeting with the governance lead, I've now been advised that they have set a line in the sand, I suppose, in that they are not expecting local government services to apply these until April 2025, even though they're coming globally from January. Just so that it lines up with the financial years. So that's what we will be looking to do, and that gives us a little bit more breathing space as well to make sure we're fully up to speed with the implications as well. But I don't foresee there being a significant change, as I say, in the service delivery, and I will provide you with further updates as soon as I receive them. But really, I just wanted to pull together some of the key points that I've set out for you in the paper today. So I'm happy to take any questions, but obviously, as I say, my knowledge on this is quite limited as well at the moment to what we've currently got in terms of the standards. And yeah, I'll be happy to report back later. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Taking the lead from Rachel there, I'm more than happy that we have that offline meeting before next meeting if we've got anything there. Otherwise, I think it might be a little bit unfair for asking questions before it's all come about. So, Ian, while I've just said that,
as always, it's not a question, but rather a thank you, because I think this document that you've laid out certainly gives me a bit more definition as to what this committee is or will be all about, and for that I'm truly thankful. However, as is my job at work, I've discovered a little typo, and it's at the bottom of page 96 of the pack, paragraph 5.2, the very last bullet, the very last sentence. Says these are summarised further below in paragraph 4.3, and it should be 5.3. So,
and just for the public, we do read the papers. There we go. That is there just to make sure that we have read them. And I hadn't picked that one up, so thank you for that. So unless there's any other comments, so Rachel, thank you for that, and Ian, thank you for your comments there, because I think that is greatly appreciated as well by officers as well. But we'll note that, and we'll go on to our final paper. Let me just remind members here. So with item 10, the Appendix B is a restricted paper, as Catherine is kindly. If we need to go into that, I'll have to exclude the public, which while there's no public physically here, obviously we'll have to do with the YouTube channel. So I don't think we'll need to go into restricted session, but if we do, Rachel or Dawn or Catherine, I'm sure you'll advise members at the appropriate moment in time. So the internal progress report is from page 101, and then just to remind members again, it's Appendix B, which is the restricted item. Rachel, over to yourself, and I don't know, Dawn, if you have a comment on this or no. Okay, thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Chair. So my last report this evening is the first internal audit progress report for the new financial year of 24-25. So I'll just take members through the brief overview of the key sections, and then I'll be happy to take any questions as well. So all of the reports that have been finalised since I last produced a progress report for the committee are provided within here. These are also reflected where they relate to 23-24 in the annual report as well, that's already been considered this evening. But for completeness, I wanted to make sure you had these in the progress report as well. So just to start off in the Appendix 1, page 113 of the pack is a copy of the internal audit plan for 24-25, and this shows you the status of each of the assignments as at the time of producing this report. Some of these have moved on further since then, as you can imagine, as it continues to be a work in progress throughout the financial year, and we will of course report back to you at each committee meeting throughout the year, as we usually do, on the outcomes of all of those audits. So since the last committee meeting, we have finalised a number of reports which are summarised for you in section 2.5 from page 106 of the papers this evening. So I'll just run very briefly through those. The first was in relation to the financial system key controls for 23-24. So this is our annual testing of key controls within the financial systems, and we tend to rotate these, so we look at different areas each time, so that we can give a good deep dive into each and cover these in turn. So this time we were focusing around council tax support processing and housing benefit elements of that, but also the Treasury management system as well, which had been subject to some changes in some of the rules in the last couple of years as well. So we wanted to give some assurance on that. And we also followed up on all of the recommendations from the last year, which we do as standard as well. So overall, we were really satisfied with the controls that we saw in place, particularly around Treasury management, which just appeared to be working really well. We're also happy with how the council tax support scheme was being administered. What did bring the assurance opinion down from being fully substantial in all areas was in relation to the recovery of housing benefit overpayments. And I know this is an area the council's already aware of, and we have picked up in previous years that needs some recovery action. So again, we've made some recommendations around that, which we will follow up on. But overall, there was nothing of significance to raise for the committee's attention within those opinions. So it's all of a green rating overall. The next was also a financial control review, but in relation to budgetary control. So this year we were focusing on the budget setting process rather than budget management or budgetary reporting. So we were really satisfied with the controls we saw in place here. It was a useful review to understand the processes that we go through in terms of setting the budget and getting that right baseline position. So we've given a good assurance opinion for the controls and the compliance. We identified some issues around environment approval, which is where we're amending budgets during the year. And those have already been addressed as at the time of reporting. So obviously we were happy that we were able to take some assurance around the progress that had already been made in that area to formalise those controls. The next was around procurement compliance. So this is another of our annual reviews where we look at compliance with the council's contract procedure rules. So we want to ensure that procurement exercises are fair and transparent, and they're being conducted in a way that ensure we achieve the best value for money. So in the sample that we looked at, which was selected, some from the contract register and some from spend reports, we were satisfied with the process that had been followed and the evidence of the procurement process in those cases. What we did highlight, however, was some gaps in the council's contract register, particularly the published version, and we did make some recommendations around that. And again, I know that is an area that had been noted previously. We have highlighted in previous years, and actions have been taken forward, hopefully, to make sure that that's progressed in future periods. The next was another financial audit around council tax and business rates. And for this review, we were particularly focusing on areas of exemptions and discounts. So where people or properties are receiving an exemption under one of the categories under our policies, just making sure that we're happy that those continue to apply and they're subject to a review process, and eligibility is being checked when we're awarding those discounts or exemptions as well. So again, whilst we were happy that a number of the controls seemed to be working well around the new discounts, new exemptions, we did identify a number of areas for improvement around making best use of data, I suppose, in terms of other information we have from our planning services, from some of the other areas in terms of council tax and so on, to make sure that we're actually identifying any changes that need to be applied, particularly around any of those exemptions. So we've given a moderate assurance for the control environment subject to some of those improvements being taken forward, and a good assurance for the compliance with what's currently in place. And the next was in relation to UK SBF on page 110. I know this has already been some reference earlier this evening as an area that's important for the council as one of those key grant programmes that's being managed over the last 12 months. So again, I was really pleased that we were able to give a really high assurance opinion on this of substantial in both the design of the controls and the compliance, which is our highest rating. This reflected the fact that the governance arrangements and the processes that had been set up seemed to be really well established and formalised. We didn't identify any areas for improvement in terms of what had been set up around managing these programmes. We also looked at the Rural England Grant Fund as well, and again we're satisfied with the controls in place for that. We looked at a sample of business grants, for example, as well, and did some sample testing on those and a couple of interventions. And again, we were happy that those expected controls had been applied in practice and they were suitably evidenced. So we didn't identify any areas where we could suggest any improvements here. Hence the good assurance opinions that we were able to give. And the last report was a slightly different one in terms of giving some assurance around preparation for regulatory change in terms of social housing. When we scoped the audit, we weren't aware that the council was going to be party to the inspection, essentially almost at the time of the audit. So we really wanted to focus the audit on the readiness for that inspection and look at any areas and lessons that could be learnt and be taken forward. And I know, as you can see, we're given a good assurance opinion on the controls and the compliance. There's still a medium organisational impact because I think that the potential risk is still high. And we have to recognise that, but that's not because the controls are poor. It's more that it was a moving feast, I suppose, at that time. With the inspections coming in, and some of the information had only just been released at the time in terms of the consumer standards. So there was still some work to be done to make sure that we were up to speed with all of that as well. But that wasn't down to the council's arrangements. That was down to the timing of things that were happening on a national level. So we made some recommendations around strengthening some of the arrangements, such as having a documented service plan that clearly sets out what our vision is for our housing service. And those have all been agreed. A number of them were implemented with immediate effect. And obviously it hopefully was a timely review to help support with the real inspection that then took place. So that's a run through of those. We've also given you an updated position on the audit actions on page 117 of the papers. So we have 11 actions which have been implemented since the snapshot position that I brought to you earlier this evening in the annual report. But we still have 32 which are overdue. So there are currently 5 that fall into the category of being over 3 months overdue and of a high priority. So those are summarised for you in Appendix 3, page 118, and also the Appendix B that's already been mentioned in the Chair's introduction. So that is a run through of the key sections, Chair, and as usual, I'll be happy to take questions on any of the detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. One I'll just pick out is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and Rural England Fund. So the leader and deputy leader asked me to sit on the grant panel for that with the East Midlands Chamber of Trade and then the UK SPF team, which you've mentioned there. And so I'm really pleased, being audit chair, that you've actually audited this and then you've checked my homework here, I suppose, and you've said the sample of the 2 interventions and the 3 business grants. What I will say is in this room is how the team presented it to us at the time. So all business grants, we weren't advised of who or what the company was and how they were all marked. So the business grant panel, and I'm assuming this is what happened with the community grant panel, we tested that against their criteria, and we could see what quality applications were. Then there were ones which fell a little bit lower than that and still met the criteria. And then there were ones that fell outside of the criteria to be awarded a business grant. Now, before we closed that off in that room, we asked to see ones that completely fell outside that in that room, and the quality was completely lower again. So there was a little boundary where you could have succeeded in the grant or you fell outside of it. So it felt as if it was calibrated, if that made sense. So it wasn't just myself, there was other people in the room who've said that. And to see that how you've tested that, Rachel, as well, gives me reassurance that it was reasonably done. And one thing we fed back to the council officers, what you could tell is anyone who'd got LBAS advice, Leicester Business Advice Service, I think it is, if I've correctly put that. Anyone who got that advice scored quite highly on the metric. Anyone who didn't, and there was a substantial of businesses who didn't attend workshops, they were very, very low on how they applied for the business grants. So the council, what I've been very assured at, has done a number of workshops, so it held that back. I'd be really interested to see on this next grant, and if anyone's watching now, you can apply for community grants and business grants, which are open right now. And any members, make sure you get your businesses in your areas and anyone you know to apply for them. And also, I would recommend that you went for LBAS. So out of all those, while I note, Rachel, everything else you've said, that one I've had, as a councillor, I've had some involvement in, and so I do appreciate that feedback, and that's how I viewed it, as when we were asked to be on that grant scheme. So to have that reassured is sort of reassured me of how that one went. Happy to take comments from any councillors, and just to reiterate, if we do go into Appendix B, we'll have to go into exempt session, but I don't think we'll need to. But okay, no further questions. Well, it is to note, and Rachel, thank you very much for that. So that is noted. That draws conclusion to the agenda. I don't have any urgent business. What I will say is, for any members that are on audit and standards, and especially on the audit side, is this is a committee that can hold the council to account. So you have to be here. Is what I will say, and thanks for everybody for attending. Thank you, Alan, for substitute for Simon, and I would like to thank Clive, Dawn, Helen, Rachel, and Catherine. It's good to see you back here. I know we were speaking on the phone, so welcome back as well. And also, I'd like to thank Tim, who isn't here tonight, for his report as well. So I'd like to draw that to a close. Ian, if the
So
the
really,
last
I'd
word?
just like to second what you've just said. I, for one, in my own kind of work life, I'm responsible for putting similar reports together about the financial status of projects. So I appreciate how difficult it is summarising the work this council does in these reports, and I'm very thankful for the reports, and they are very helpful.